He's just a single dad, eating his kids' leftover nuggets in a crowded food court. But when the janitor watching him turns out to be a billionaire, everything changes in an instant because the man you've ignored could be the one to change your life forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Danny Winters stared at the half-eaten chicken nugget on his plate. His stomach still growling. The food court buzzed with activity around him, families chatting, teenagers laughing, the constant hum of mall life. But Danny felt oddly alone in the crowd. He watched as Emma and Lucas played at the arcade just across the way. Their faces lit up with each game, their laughter carrying over the din of the mall. The sight brought a tired smile to his face. At least they could still find joy in these small moments. His rough, calloused fingers absently traced the edge of the plastic food tray. 10 hours of construction work, followed by a 4-hour shift at the gas station, had left his muscles aching, but he couldn't rest. Not with rent due next week and Emma needing new shoes for school. "Dad," Lucas's voice carried across the food court. "Look how many tickets I got." Danny raised his hand in acknowledgement, forcing enthusiasm into his wave. "That's great, buddy." The words felt hollow in his throat, but his son beamed anyway. The remains of their shared meal sat before him, a small order of chicken nuggets and fries he'd split between the kids, keeping only the leftovers for himself. It wasn't much of a dinner, but it was all he could afford today. The guilty knot in his stomach tightened as he remembered the field trip permission slip crumpled in his pocket. Another expense he'd have to figure out somehow. A movement caught his eye. A janitor pushing his broom methodically across the floor nearby. The man wore a plain gray uniform, his movements careful and deliberate. There was something about him that made Danny pause. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in the way he worked, or the careful attention he paid to each sweep of his broom. Danny watched as the janitor navigated around busy tables, somehow managing to clean without disturbing anyone. His face was lined with age, but his eyes held a sharp awareness that seemed at odds with his humble task. The weight of the day pressed down on Danny's shoulders. He'd been holding it together for so long, working every available hour, stretching every dollar, trying to give his kids some semblance of a normal life. But moments like this, sitting alone with cold fries in his thoughts, made it hard to keep believing things would get better. Emma's voice drifted over, teaching Lucas how to play skee-ball. She'd grown up too fast, becoming a second parent to her brother when their mother left. The thought sent a familiar ache through Danny's chest. His daughter shouldn't have to carry that responsibility. He picked up a cold fry, more out of habit than hunger. The mall's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the table, highlighting the worn spots on his work shirt. He'd need to patch it soon. Another item for his endless to-do list. The janitor had worked his way closer now, his methodical sweeping bringing him near Danny's table. Their eyes met briefly, and Danny felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. Not that he knew the man, but something in his gaze seemed to understand. The older man's eyes held no judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement that made Danny want to look away. It was too much like seeing his own struggles reflected back at him. Danny checked his watch. 5 minutes until he needed to collect the kids and head home. The evening shift at the gas station loomed ahead. Another 4 hours of counting other people's money, while his own account hovered near empty. He gathered the food wrappers, trying to leave the table tidy. His mother had always taught him to respect other people's work, especially those doing jobs others looked down on. As he stood, his joints protested the movement, reminding him that 40 wasn't as young as it used to be. The janitor had paused in his sweeping, leaning slightly on his broom. Their eyes met again, and this time Danny noticed something else in the man's expression. Something that looked almost like hope. It was disconcerting, that quiet certainty in a stranger's gaze. Danny shifted uncomfortably, breaking the connection. He was probably imagining things, projecting his own wishes onto a random encounter. The exhaustion must be getting to him. "Emma! Lucas!" he called out, gathering their few belongings. "Time to go, kids!" As his children rushed over, tickets clutched in their hands and excitement in their voices, Danny felt the janitor's eyes still on him. He resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on Lucas's animated description of his game victories. But something about that brief exchange lingered, like a whisper of possibility in the stale mall air. Danny shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought. He had more immediate concerns than strange connections with silent janitors. Emma helped Lucas gather his tickets, her small face serious as she counted them. "Maybe next time we'll have enough for that big stuffed bear," she said, trying to soften her brother's disappointment at their modest prize options. Danny's heart squeezed. Even at 10, she was always thinking of others, always trying to make things better. Just like he was always trying, and sometimes feeling like he was always falling short, he guided his children toward the mall exit, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The janitor had resumed his sweeping, the soft swish of his broom blending with the ambient noise of the mall. Danny allowed himself one last glance back. The older man continued his work, same as before, but something about his presence stayed with Danny. It was like a memory he couldn't quite grasp, or a dream that faded upon waking. Lucas tugged at his hand, pulling him toward the doors. "Can we come back tomorrow, Dad? Please?" "We'll see, buddy," Danny replied automatically, the same answer he gave to most requests these days. It was better than saying no, better than explaining why they couldn't afford simple pleasures other families took for granted. As they walked into the evening air, Danny tried to shake off the strange feeling from his encounter with the janitor. He had enough to worry about without dwelling on mysterious strangers. The gas station uniform waited in his car, and the night shift wouldn't work itself. But even as he helped his children into the car, that quiet moment of connection stayed with him, like a small flame refusing to be extinguished by the winds of reality. The food court had grown busier as the afternoon wore on. The weekend crowd filled nearly every table, their chatter echoing off the high ceiling. Danny sat back in his plastic chair, his empty tray pushed aside. The tension in his shoulders had eased just a little as he watched Emma and Lucas play at the arcade. Emma stood on her tiptoes, gripping the controls of the racing game. Her brown ponytail bounced as she leaned into each turn. Lucas watched from beside her, jumping up and down, cheering her on. "Go, Emma, you're winning." Danny's worn wallet felt lighter after giving them each $5 for games, but their joy made it worth every penny. These small moments of happiness were what he lived for, even if they came at a cost. Movement caught his eye as Malcolm passed nearby, pushing his cleaning cart with careful attention. The janitor's movements were unhurried yet precise, each sweep of his broom deliberate. His gray uniform was pressed and neat. Despite the nature of his work, Danny found his gaze drawn to the older man again and again. There was something about Malcolm that seemed different. Most of the other maintenance workers rushed through their tasks, but Malcolm took his time, treating each detail with care. His presence had a calm certainty about it that stood out amid the chaos of the food court. As Malcolm cleaned nearby tables, Danny noticed how he worked with quiet dignity. He didn't avoid eye contact with people like many service workers did, nor did he seem bothered by the occasional rude customer who left a mess. Instead, he carried himself with an air of peaceful purpose. A group of teenagers at the next table got up, leaving behind a scatter of French fries and crumpled napkins. Malcolm approached their table, and Danny expected to see frustration cross the janitor's face. Instead, Malcolm simply began his work with the same steady patience he'd shown all afternoon. Danny checked his watch. They'd need to leave soon. The weekend chores wouldn't do themselves, and Monday's early shift loomed ahead. He'd learned long ago that single parenthood meant constant motion, a never-ending cycle of work and responsibility. Still, he allowed himself a few more minutes of rest. The weight of his 2 jobs, the stack of bills at home, and the constant worry about making ends meet, it all seemed a little lighter here, watching his children play without a care in the world. Emma ran over to their table, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad, I got the high score!" She beamed with pride, and Danny felt his heart swell. "That's amazing, sweetie." He pulled her into a quick hug. "Where's your brother?" "Still trying to beat my score," she said with a grin, grabbing her water bottle from the table. "But he'll never do it." She hurried back to the arcade, her enthusiasm uncontained. Danny gathered their things, stuffing empty containers into the paper bag. As he stood to throw away their trash, he noticed Malcolm again. The janitor was closer now, methodically wiping down a nearby table. There was something almost meditative about his movements. The overhead lights caught Malcolm's face as he worked, and Danny saw kindness in the older man's eyes. Not the practiced customer service smile that retail workers wore, but something genuine and warm. Their eyes met briefly, and Malcolm gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Danny felt an unexpected connection in that moment, though neither of them spoke. Perhaps it was recognition of another person who understood what it meant to work hard without complaint. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something he couldn't quite name. "Emma, Lucas," Danny called out. "Time to go, kids." He heard their disappointed groans, but knew they'd comply. They were good kids, despite everything they'd been through. As Danny shouldered his worn jacket, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. Maybe it was the simple pleasure of watching his children play, or the strange peace he'd found in observing Malcolm's quiet dignity. Whatever the reason, the crushing weight of his daily struggles seemed a little more manageable. He turned to leave, his kids falling into step beside him. That's when he heard it. A quiet voice behind him, gentle but clear. "You remind me of someone I once knew," Malcolm said. "Lots of potential, just trapped." Danny stopped mid-step, a strange sensation washing over him. The words were simple enough, but something about them reached deep into his chest and took hold. He turned back, questions forming on his lips, but Malcolm had already moved away, pushing his cart toward another section of the food court. Lucas tugged at Danny's sleeve. "Dad, are we going?" "Yeah, buddy," Danny said, his mind still processing the strange encounter. "We're going." As they walked toward the mall exit, Danny couldn't shake Malcolm's words from his thoughts. They weren't much, just a simple observation from a stranger. But they stirred something inside him, a long-buried feeling he couldn't quite identify. Emma skipped ahead, while Lucas told an animated story about his gaming adventures. Danny walked behind them, his thoughts drifting back to the food court and the mysterious janitor, whose few words had somehow reached right into the heart of his struggles. He had no idea how Malcolm had seen through him so easily, or why those particular words felt so significant. But as they stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, Danny found himself wondering about the encounter, about Malcolm, and about all the things left unsaid in that brief moment of connection. The parking lot stretched before them, filled with cars gleaming in the sunday. Danny reached for his keys, the familiar weight of them in his pocket, a reminder of reality, of bills to pay, meals to cook, and another week of endless responsibilities ahead. But Malcolm's words echoed in his mind. Lots of potential, just trapped. They followed him to the car, settling into his thoughts like seeds waiting to take root. The drive home from the mall was filled with excited chatter from the back seat. Emma and Lucas talked about their arcade victories, comparing scores and laughing about their friendly competition. Danny smiled in the rearview mirror, watching their animated faces in the fading daylight. His old sedan rattled slightly as they drove, another reminder of the repairs he couldn't afford. "Did you see how many tickets I won, Dad?" Lucas bounced in his seat, clutching a small plastic dinosaur he'd gotten with his tickets. "I beat my high score." "That's great, buddy." Danny's voice was warm despite his worries. "And Emma, looks like you found a good use for your tickets too." Emma nodded, admiring the friendship bracelet she'd chosen. "Yeah, Sarah has one just like it at school. Now we can match." The apartment complex came into view, a tired-looking building with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs. Danny guided the car into their designated spot, trying not to look at the rust spreading across his neighbors' vehicles. Their home was on the second floor, and the kids raced up the metal stairs, their footsteps echoing in the evening air. Inside, Danny flipped on the lights, revealing their small but tidy two-bedroom apartment. The worn carpet and dated wallpaper couldn't hide the care he took in maintaining their home. He headed straight to the kitchen, knowing dinner needed to be started. Opening the refrigerator door, Danny's heart sank. The shelves were sparse, half a gallon of milk, some eggs, and a few vegetables past their prime. The pantry wasn't much better, offering only a box of pasta and some canned tomato sauce. He'd been stretching the groceries as far as possible, but tomorrow's shopping trip couldn't be postponed any longer. "Who wants spaghetti?" he called out, trying to sound cheerful. "Me?" both kids shouted from the living room, where they'd settled in front of their secondhand TV. Danny filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. As it heated, he pulled out the stack of bills he'd been avoiding. Electric, gas, rent, car insurance. The numbers blurred together, each one a weight pressing down on his shoulders. The medical bill from Emma's last checkup sat on top, the amount due circled in red. The water began to boil, and Danny pushed the bills aside. He broke the spaghetti in half, a habit from when the kids were younger, and dropped it into the pot. The sauce simmered in another pan, filling the small kitchen with the scent of herbs and tomatoes. "Homework done?" he called out. "Almost," Emma replied. "Just have math left." "I finished mine at school," Lucas added proudly. Danny stirred the pasta, his mind working overtime. He'd have to pick up an extra shift at the warehouse this week. Maybe Mr. Peterson would let him work Sunday too, though it would mean missing another family dinner. The thought made his chest tight. Dinner was simple but filling. Danny watched his children eat, grateful they at least had food on the table. Emma told stories about her day at school, while Lucas constructed elaborate pasta towers between bites. These moments, just the three of them together, made everything else feel a little more manageable. After dinner, Danny supervised homework while doing dishes. The stack of bills caught his eye again, but he pushed the worry aside. There would be time for that after the kids were in bed. "Time to get ready for bed," he announced at 8 o'clock, met with the usual protests and negotiations. "5 more minutes?" Lucas pleaded, looking up from his comic book. Not tonight, buddy. School tomorrow, remember? The bedtime routine was well practiced. Teeth brushed, faces washed, pajamas on. Danny read a chapter from their current bedtime story, doing all the different voices just the way they liked. Lucas's room was first, dinosaur nightlight on, covers tucked just right. Love you, Dad, Lucas mumbled, already half asleep. Love you too, buddy. Danny pressed a kiss to his son's forehead. Emma took longer to settle. She was at that age where questions about everything kept her mind spinning. Tonight, she asked about the stars they couldn't see through the city lights. Dad, she said as he pulled her covers up, are you okay? You look sad at dinner. Danny's heart squeezed. Sometimes she noticed too much. I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired from work. You work too hard, she said softly, sounding older than her 10 years. That's what dads do, he smiled, hoping it reached his eyes. Get some sleep now. Back in the living room, Danny sank into his worn armchair. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Bills spread across the coffee table, demanding his attention. His dreams felt so far away from this reality. Dreams of a house with a yard where the kids could play, of college funds and family vacations, of not having to count every penny. He picked up Emma's latest school photo. Her smile was bright and hopeful, untouched by the worries that kept him awake at night. Lucas's report card sat nearby, full of good grades and positive comments. They deserved so much more than he could give them. Danny leaned back, closing his eyes. The cycle seemed endless. Work, bills, worry, repeat. Each month brought the same challenges, the same impossible math of stretching dollars further than they could go. He thought about the other parents at the mall, buying their kids new clothes and toys without checking price tags first. Would things ever change? Or would he always be stuck here, one missed paycheck away from disaster? The question circled in his mind, familiar and heavy. Tomorrow would bring another early morning, another day of trying to keep everything together. For now, though, his children slept peacefully in their beds, safe and loved. It would have to be enough. The next morning brought a crisp autumn breeze that rustled through the nearly bare trees outside the mall. Danny guided his old sedan into the parking lot, the engine making that familiar rattling sound that worried him more each day. Emma and Lucas bounded out of the car as soon as he killed the engine, their energy seemingly limitless despite the early hour. Remember to stay where I can see you, Danny called out as they made their way through the mall's glass doors. The familiar smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee filled the air, making his stomach growl. He hadn't eaten breakfast, saving what little food they had at home for the kids. The food court was quieter than usual for a Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through the skylight, casting long shadows across the recently mopped floors. Danny's eyes automatically searched for the familiar figure of Malcolm, the janitor from yesterday. His kids rushed ahead to their favorite spot near the arcade, but Danny's feet slowed as he caught sight of something unexpected. There, standing near the center of the food court, was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his Italian leather shoes gleamed under the mall lights. He held an expensive-looking phone to his ear, gesturing occasionally as he spoke. Danny blinked hard, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The man's face. It was Malcolm, the same quiet janitor from yesterday, but completely transformed. Yes, we'll need to move forward with the expansion plans, Malcolm was saying into his phone, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone used to making big decisions. The foundation's work is too important to delay. Danny felt rooted to the spot, his mouth slightly open. He watched as Malcolm paced slowly, nodding at whatever the person on the other end was saying. Gone was the humble janitor's uniform, replaced by clothing that probably cost more than Danny made in 3 months. Emma's voice cut through his daze. Dad, can we get tokens for the arcade? Just a minute, sweetie, Danny managed, his eyes still fixed on Malcolm. The well-dressed man turned slightly, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was a flash of recognition in Malcolm's expression, but he didn't break stride in his conversation. Instead, he gave Danny a small, knowing smile, the same gentle expression he'd worn in his janitor's uniform. Danny's mind raced back to their encounter yesterday. The wise words, the careful observations, the fact that Malcolm had known his name without being told. It all started to take on a different meaning now. The quarterly reports looked promising. Malcolm continued into his phone, moving toward the far end of the food court. We've helped more families this year than ever before. Lucas tugged at Danny's sleeve. Dad, you're acting weird. Why are you staring at that man? Danny shook his head, trying to clear it. Sorry, buddy. I just thought I recognized someone. But it was more than recognition. Danny felt like he was watching two completely different realities collide. The humble janitor, who had shown such quiet wisdom yesterday, was apparently someone else entirely. Someone important. Someone with power and influence. Malcolm's voice grew fainter as he walked away. Schedule the board meeting for next week. We need to discuss the new initiative for single-parent households. Danny watched as Malcolm approached a door marked Private Office at the far end of the food court. It was one of those doors most shoppers probably never noticed, blending seamlessly into the wall. Malcolm produced a key card from his pocket and, with one final nod in Danny's direction, disappeared inside. The food court continued its normal Saturday morning routine around him. Families chatting over breakfast, store employees preparing for the day, the distant electronic beeping of arcade games. But Danny stood frozen, his world slightly tilted on its axis. The man who had listened to his troubles yesterday, who had offered those cryptic words of wisdom while sweeping the floor, was clearly someone far more significant than a simple janitor. "Dad!" Emma called again, more insistent this time. "Can we please get tokens now?" Danny turned to his children, their faces eager and innocent, completely unaware of the strange scene that had just unfolded. He reached for his wallet, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. But something had changed. A small spark of possibility had been lit in his mind. "Sure, kids," he said, managing a smile. "Let's get those tokens." As he walked toward the arcade counter, Danny couldn't help glancing back at the private office door where Malcolm had disappeared. His mind buzzed with questions. Who was Malcolm really? Why had he been dressed as a janitor yesterday? And most importantly, what did it mean that their paths had crossed? The door remained closed, offering no answers. But Danny couldn't shake the feeling that his strange encounter with Malcolm, both versions of him, was somehow significant. He just couldn't imagine how or why. Emma and Lucas rushed ahead to the token machine, their excitement palpable. Danny followed, his thoughts still dwelling on the mysterious Malcolm, even as he helped his children count out their tokens. The normal Saturday morning routine continued, but nothing felt quite normal anymore. Something had shifted, even if Danny couldn't yet understand what it meant. The evening air had grown chilly as Danny sat at his worn kitchen table, the kids already tucked into bed. His ancient laptop hummed quietly, casting a blue glow across the stack of unpaid bills beside it. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee, his third cup of the day, and clicked through the local news website. A headline caught his eye. "Local Billionaire's secret mission to help single parents." Danny leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. The article showed a familiar face. The same gentle eyes, the same quiet smile. It was Malcolm, the janitor from the food court, but now he wore an expensive suit and stood in front of a downtown office building. "Malcolm Fairweather, CEO of Fairweather Enterprises?" Danny read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the article. Known for his unconventional approach to philanthropy, often works undercover to observe community needs firsthand. Donated over $50 million to single-parent support programs in the past year alone. The coffee cup slipped from his grip, spilling across the table. Danny barely noticed as he stared at the screen, his mind racing back to their conversation in the food court. The way Malcolm had watched him, how he'd known Danny's name without being told, it all made sense now. He grabbed paper towels to mop up the spill, his movements mechanical as his thoughts swirled. The man he'd opened up to about his struggles, the quiet janitor who'd offered those cryptic words of encouragement, was actually one of the richest people in the city. Danny sank back into his chair, running his hands through his hair. The article mentioned how Malcolm often disguised himself as various service workers, janitors, maintenance staff, even a hot dog vendor once, to understand the real challenges faced by working-class families. The sound of Lucas coughing in his sleep snapped Danny back to reality. He checked the time, nearly midnight. In just a few hours, he'd need to be at the construction site for his morning shift, but sleep felt impossible now. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike, his closest friend at the construction site. "You still up? Can't sleep." Danny replied quickly. "Come over, coffee's hot, need to talk anyway." 20 minutes later, Mike's truck rumbled into the driveway. Danny met him at the door, pressing a finger to his lips to remind his friend to keep quiet. They settled at the kitchen table, where the laptop still displayed Malcolm's photo. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mike said, accepting a fresh cup of coffee. His work boots were caked with dried mud, and his hands bore the same calluses as Danny's, the marks of their shared trade. "Remember that janitor I told you about? The one from the food court?" Danny turned the laptop so Mike could see the screen. "That's him." Mike leaned forward, squinting at the image. Malcolm Fairweather? The billionaire? He let out a low whistle. You're telling me you had a heart-to-heart with one of the richest guys in town while he was pretending to be a janitor? Sounds crazy, right? Danny stood up and paced the small kitchen. But it was definitely him. Same face, same voice. He knew things about me, Mike. Knew my name when I never told him. Mike took a long sip of coffee, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it's not so crazy. Article says he does this kind of thing all the time. Question is, why'd he talk to you specifically? Danny stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. That's what I can't figure out. Of all the people in that food court, why strike up a conversation with me? Could be random chance, Mike suggested, but his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it himself. You should have seen the way he looked at me, like he could see right through me. Danny's voice dropped lower. He said I reminded him of someone he once knew. Someone with potential who was trapped by circumstances. Sounds like the kind of thing a billionaire philanthropist might say, Mike mused. But here's what I don't get. If he's so interested in helping people like you, why just disappear after one conversation? Danny shook his head. I don't know, nothing about this makes sense. He glanced at the kids' bedroom door, thinking about Emma and Lucas sleeping peacefully, unaware of their father's strange encounter with a billionaire in disguise. Mike finished his coffee and stood up. Look, maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. But I've known you long enough to know when something's got you rattled. And this thing with Malcolm, it's definitely got you rattled. I keep thinking about fate, Danny admitted. Like, what are the odds of something like this happening? A billionaire who helps single parents just happens to be disguised as a janitor in the same food court where I'm eating my kids' leftover nuggets? Man, now you're starting to sound like my grandmother with all her talk about destiny and divine intervention. Mike chuckled, but his eyes were kind. Though I got to admit, it's one hell of a coincidence. Danny walked his friend to the door, their conversation having left him with more questions than answers. As Mike's truck pulled away, Danny stood in the doorway, looking up at the night sky. The stars were barely visible through the city's light pollution, but he could make out a few bright points twinkling above. Back inside, he closed the laptop, Malcolm's face disappearing from view. The article and Mike's words tumbled through his mind as he prepared for bed. Was it really just chance that brought him and Malcolm together that day? Or was there something more at work? Some greater purpose he couldn't yet understand. The morning sun beat down on Danny's weathered Toyota as he merged onto Main Street, the engine making an unfamiliar rattling sound that made his stomach clench. Emma and Lucas sat in the back seat, sharing whispered jokes that usually would have made him smile. Today, though, his mind was elsewhere, calculating the dwindling dollars in his bank account. Dad, what's that noise? Emma asked, her voice tinged with worry. Just the car being a little cranky today, sweetie, Danny replied, trying to keep his voice light. But the rattling grew louder, and the steering wheel began to vibrate under his calloused hands. The car lurched once, twice, and then died completely. Danny managed to guide it to the curb, his heart pounding as horns blared behind him. He turned the key again and again, but the engine only made a sick, whining sound. Are we going to be late for school? Lucas asked from the back seat, his small face scrunched with concern. Danny checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. He had to get the kids to school, make it to his morning shift at the warehouse by 9, and somehow figure out how to fix the car before his evening job at the convenience store. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, making it hard to breathe. It's okay, guys, he said, forcing a smile. We'll figure something out. He pulled out his phone, checking his bank balance while the kids weren't looking. The number made him wince. $127.43. Not nearly enough for major car repairs, and rent was due in 2 weeks. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Hello, Sarah? I hate to ask, but could you possibly give the kids a ride to school? My car broke down. He listened to her kind response, relief washing over him. Thank you so much. We're on Main Street, just past the pharmacy. While they waited for Mrs. Rodriguez, Danny popped the hood and stared at the engine, though he knew little about cars. The smell of hot metal and oil filled his nostrils as he pretended to inspect various parts, mostly to look productive in front of his children. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived 15 minutes later in her minivan, her warm smile hiding any inconvenience she might have felt. Hop in, kids. We'll get you to school in no time. Danny hugged Emma and Lucas goodbye, watching as they climbed into the van. I'll figure out pickup time, okay? Don't worry about anything. Once they were gone, he called a tow truck, his stomach churning at the thought of the cost. The driver, a burly man named Pete, arrived quickly and hooked up the Toyota. "Where to?" Pete asked, clipboard in hand. Danny named the closest repair shop, one he'd used before. As they rode in the truck's cab, Pete tried to make conversation, but Danny could only manage short responses, his mind racing through possibilities. Could he put the repairs on his maxed-out credit card? Would his boss at the warehouse understand if he was late? At Jerry's auto repair, the news was worse than he'd feared. Jerry, a mechanic he'd known for years, wiped his greasy hands on a rag and delivered the verdict. "Timing belt shot, Danny. And while we're in there, the water pump needs replacing too. Looking at around $1,200, maybe more." The words hit Danny like a physical blow. $1,200 might as well have been $12 million. He leaned against the wall of the shop, the smell of motor oil and rubber making him slightly dizzy. "Any way we could just fix the timing belt for now?" he asked, knowing it was a long shot. Jerry shook his head. "Not unless you want to risk bigger problems down the road. Look, I can give you a small discount, but parts alone are going to run close to $800. Danny nodded numbly, thanked Jerry, and stepped outside into the morning Sunday. He called his warehouse supervisor, explaining the situation. Though understanding, his boss's words were clear. Missing work meant missing pay, something Danny couldn't afford right now. He spent the next hour making calls to his bank about a loan, denied. To his credit card company about increasing his limit, denied. To various friends who might be able to help. Everyone was struggling themselves. Each no felt like another brick added to the weight he carried. By the time he caught the bus to pick up his kids from school, Danny's shirt was damp with sweat and his head throbbed with tension. The bus ride took twice as long as driving would have, and he watched the familiar streets pass by through smudged windows, feeling like he was watching his carefully balanced life begin to crumble. Emma and Lucas were waiting in the school playground, their faces lighting up when they saw him. But their smiles faded slightly when they realized he was on foot. "Where's the car, Dad?" Emma asked as they walked toward the bus stop. "It's at the mechanic's," Danny replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll need to take the bus for a few days." "Like an adventure?" Lucas suggested hopefully. Danny forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy, like an adventure." The bus ride home was long and hot. Lucas fell asleep against Danny's arm, while Emma stared out the window, unusually quiet. Danny's mind wouldn't stop spinning, calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up. When they finally reached their small apartment, Danny's exhaustion felt bone deep. He watched as his children settled into their usual after-school routine. Emma at the kitchen table with her homework, Lucas playing with his toy cars on the living room rug. Their faces were peaceful, trusting, completely unaware of the storm of worry in their father's mind. Danny stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at his children, his heart aching with love and fear. Emma's dark hair fell across her face as she concentrated on her math problems, just like her mother's used to. Lucas hummed quietly to himself as he pushed his cars around an imaginary track, making gentle, vrooming sound. They deserved so much more than this constant struggle, this life of just barely getting by. Danny ran a hand over his tired face, hoping against hope that something would change soon. Danny's phone buzzed in his pocket while he was fixing a leaky pipe under Mrs. Henderson's sink. The old lady had been kind enough to let him do odd jobs around her house for extra cash, especially since his car broke down last week. He wiped his hands on his worn jeans and checked the unfamiliar number flashing on his screen. "Hello?" Danny's voice echoed in the cramped space under the sink. "Danny Winters?" The voice was calm and familiar. "This is Malcolm Fairweather." Danny banged his head on the pipe in surprise. "Mr. Fairweather?" He scrambled out from under the sink, apologizing quickly to Mrs. Henderson as he stepped outside onto her small porch. "Please call me Malcolm." There was a warmth in his voice that didn't match Danny's image of a billionaire. "I was hoping we could meet this afternoon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Danny's mind raced. The billionaire wanted to meet with him? He glanced at his watch. "I have to pick up my kids from school at 3. This won't take long. Could you meet me at the Riverside Tower, floor 32, around 2 o'clock? Danny thought about his broken-down car sitting in the mechanic's lot. "I don't have a car right now," he admitted, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I'll send a car for you," Malcolm replied without hesitation. "It'll be there in 30 minutes. Before Danny could protest, the call ended. He stood on Mrs. Henderson's porch, his phone still pressed to his ear, trying to make sense of what had just happened. True to his word, a sleek black car pulled up outside Mrs. Henderson's house exactly 30 minutes later. Danny had quickly finished the pipe repair and changed into the cleanest shirt he had with him, a faded blue button-down with a small coffee stain near the collar. The driver, a professional-looking woman in a dark suit, opened the door for him. "Mr. Winters, I'm here to take you to Riverside Tower." The car's leather seats were softer than anything Danny had ever sat on. He tried not to fidget as they drove through parts of town he rarely visited, past gleaming skyscrapers and expensive boutiques. His calloused hands looked out of place against the car's pristine interior. Riverside Tower stretched into the sky like a giant glass needle. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a security desk that looked more like an art installation than a workplace. Danny felt increasingly self-conscious in his worn clothes as the elevator climbed to the 32nd floor. The doors opened to reveal an office that could have housed his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Malcolm stood near one of the windows, wearing an impeccable suit that probably cost more than Danny made in a year. "Danny," Malcolm smiled warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Danny shook his hand, noting how different Malcolm looked from the humble janitor he'd first met. "Thank you for sending the car," he managed to say. "Please sit." Malcolm gestured to a pair of leather chairs near his desk. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." Danny perched on the edge of the chair, feeling like he might somehow damage it just by sitting there. Malcolm poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher and sat down across from Danny. For a moment, he just studied him with the same quiet intensity he'd shown in the food court. "I've been watching you, Danny," Malcolm finally said, his voice gentle but direct. "Not in a concerning way," he added with a slight smile, noticing Danny's expression. "But I've seen how hard you work. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Always putting your children first. Never complaining, even when things get tough." Danny shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "How do you know all this?" "I make it my business to know about people who catch my interest," Malcolm replied. "People with potential. People who deserve a chance but haven't gotten one yet." He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up a folder. "I have a position opening up in one of my companies. Assistant Operations Manager at Fairweather Construction. The salary is substantial, enough to support your family comfortably. Full benefits, including medical and dental. A company car." Danny's heart started pounding. This had to be some kind of joke. I've never managed anything except repair jobs. I don't have a college degree." "What you have is more valuable," Malcolm said, sitting back down. "You have work ethic, integrity, and real-world experience. You understand the value of hard work, and you know how to solve problems. Everything else can be learned." He handed Danny the folder. Inside was an employment contract with a salary figure that made Danny's hands shake. It was more money than he'd ever dreamed of making. I don't understand," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Malcolm leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. "Because I believe in investing in people who deserve it. People who will use the opportunity not just to help themselves, but to help others. I see that potential in you, Danny." Danny stared at the contract, his mind racing. This kind of opportunity could change everything. No more choosing between paying bills and buying groceries. No more watching his kids wear hand-me-down. No more lying awake at night, wondering how he'd afford Emma's next doctor's visit. But something held him back. Years of struggling had taught him that nothing came easy, that every silver lining had a cloud. He looked up at Malcolm, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motives. "This seems too good to be true," he said honestly. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't know if I can do this. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" Malcolm's expression remained patient and understanding, but Danny couldn't shake the feeling that this was all happening too fast. The contract in his hands represented everything he'd ever wanted for his family, but the weight of it terrified him. Danny stood in front of the gleaming glass building, his reflection a stark contrast to the polished exterior. His work boots left dusty marks on the pristine marble floor as he entered the lobby, earning a disapproving glance from the security guard. The weight of his worn jacket felt heavier than usual as he approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Malcolm Fairweather," Danny said, his voice quiet but steady. "Danny Winters." The receptionist's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Yes, Mr. Winters. Please take the elevator to the 20th floor." The elevator ride gave Danny time to think. Too much time. His mind raced with questions. Why would a billionaire want to meet with him? What could Malcolm possibly want? The same man who had been sweeping floors in the mall food court just days ago now wanted to see him in this towering office building. The elevator doors opened to reveal an expansive office space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below. Danny's boots sank into plush carpeting as a young assistant led him through a maze of modern furniture and abstract art. "Mr. Fairweather is expecting you," she said, gesturing to a large wooden door. Malcolm sat behind a massive desk, but his demeanor remained as humble as it had been in the food court. He wore the same kind smile, though his janitor's uniform had been replaced by an expertly tailored suit. "Danny," Malcolm said warmly, rising to shake his hand. "Please, have a seat." Danny lowered himself into a leather chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "I have to admit, Mr. Fairweather, I'm a bit confused about why I'm here." Malcolm's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Please, call me Malcolm. And you're here because I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age." Danny shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I doubt that, sir. He gestured at the office around them. "And I'm just trying to keep my head above water." "That's exactly what I mean," Malcolm said, leaning forward. 25 years ago, I was working 3 jobs to support my family. I know what it's like to count every penny, to lie awake at night wondering how you'll make rent." Danny's tension eased slightly. There was something genuine in Malcolm's voice, something that resonated with his own struggles. "I've been watching you, Danny, not just at the mall, but I've done my research. 2 jobs, single father, always putting your children first. The way you handle yourself, the dignity you maintain despite your circumstances, it speaks volumes about your character." Danny felt his cheeks flush. "I'm just doing what any father would do." Malcolm shook his head. "No, not every father would. Trust me, I know." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I started my foundation because I wanted to help people like you, people with potential who just need a chance to break free from the cycle of poverty." "I appreciate that, sir." "Malcolm," Danny corrected himself, "but I'm not looking for charity." Malcolm turned back to face him, his expression serious. "I'm not offering charity, Danny. I'm offering you a job, a real opportunity." He returned to his desk and pulled out a folder. "I need someone to oversee our foundation's housing renovation program, someone who understands construction, who knows what it's like to struggle, and who has the heart to help others. The position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, and flexible hours, so you can be there for your children." Danny's heart pounded in his chest. The salary Malcolm mentioned was more than triple what he currently made. It would mean no more second job, no more missed school events, no more choosing between paying bills and buying groceries. "Why me?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm's response was immediate. "Because you have integrity. Because despite everything life has thrown at you, you've never given up. Because you're exactly the kind of person who can help others find their way out of similar situations." Danny stared at the folder in front of him, containing what could be the answer to all his prayers. Yet something held him back. Pride, fear, or maybe a combination of both. It's overwhelming," Danny admitted. "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You are," Malcolm interrupted gently. "We'll provide all the training you need. What we can't teach is character, and that you have in abundance." Malcolm stood and walked around his desk, sitting in the chair next to Danny. The billion-dollar executive disappeared, and the humble man from the food court returned. "I know this feels too good to be true. I know you're wondering what the catch is. But sometimes, Danny, life offers us a chance to change everything. The question is whether we're brave enough to take it." Danny looked down at his calloused hands, thinking of Emma and Lucas, thinking of all the times he'd had to say no to their simple requests because there wasn't enough money, thinking of the broken-down car in his driveway and the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table. "Take the weekend to think about it," Malcolm said, sliding the folder closer to Danny. "Talk it over with your children. Read through everything carefully. But remember, this isn't charity. This is an opportunity you've earned through years of hard work and dedication." Danny picked up the folder, its weight feeling like both a lifeline and a burden. This decision could change everything. But change was terrifying when you'd spent so long just trying to survive. As he stood to leave, Malcolm's voice stopped him. "Danny, I meant what I said in the food court. You don't have to be stuck in this cycle forever. Change comes when you least expect it." Danny nodded, clutching the folder to his chest as he left the office. The elevator ride down was a blur, his mind swimming with possibilities and doubts. The security guard who had eyed him suspiciously earlier now held the door open with a smile, but Danny barely noticed. Standing outside the building, he looked up at the 20th floor where Malcolm's office overlooked the city. The folder in his hands contained what could be the answer to all his prayers, or the biggest risk he'd ever taken. Danny stood there, caught between his familiar struggle and the promise of something better, knowing the decision he made could change not just his life, but his children's future as well. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Danny prepared breakfast for Emma and Lucas. Emma sat at the worn kitchen table, absently pushing her cereal around in circles. She hadn't been feeling well lately, and Danny had noticed dark circles forming under her eyes. "Dad, my stomach hurts again," Emma said quietly, her spoon clinking against the ceramic bowl. Danny's hands paused over the lunch bags he was packing. This was the third time this week she'd complained about stomach pain. He'd initially thought it was just a bug, but something in his gut told him this was different. "Maybe we should skip school today," Danny said, reaching over to feel her forehead. "I'll call Dr. Matthews and see if she can fit us in." Lucas looked up from his own breakfast. "Does this mean I get to stay home too?" "No, buddy, you're going to school." Danny ruffled his son's hair. "Mrs. Johnson next door will watch Emma while I'm at work, and we'll see the doctor this afternoon." The morning passed in a blur of worry and arrangements. Danny called in sick to his morning job, knowing he'd have to make up the hours later. He managed to get an afternoon appointment with Dr. Matthews, their longtime pediatrician, who sometimes let them pay in installments. The doctor's office was quiet when they arrived, the walls decorated with cheerful cartoon characters that seemed to mock Danny's growing anxiety. Emma sat close to him in the waiting room, her small hand clutched in his larger one. "Emma Winters?" the nurse called, her voice gentle. During the examination, Danny watched as Dr. Matthews pressed carefully on Emma's abdomen, noting where she winced. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but Danny had known her long enough to notice the slight furrow in her brow. "I'd like to run some tests," Dr. Matthews said, pulling up a chair. "Blood work mainly, and an ultrasound to rule out anything serious." Danny's throat tightened. "How much will that cost?" "Let's focus on Emma's health first," she replied kindly. "We can discuss payment options later." The next few hours were a parade of needles, machines, and waiting rooms. Emma remained brave throughout, only crying once when they drew blood. Danny held her hand, telling silly jokes to distract her, while his mind raced with calculations of overtime hours and payment plans. When his phone rang 3 days later, Danny was at work, hauling boxes at his warehouse job. The caller ID showed Dr. Matthews' office. He stepped outside, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Mr. Winters." Dr. Matthews' voice was professional but gentle. "I've received Emma's test results. We found some abnormalities in her liver function tests. Emma has an autoimmune condition affecting her liver. It's treatable, but she'll need medication and regular monitoring." The world seemed to tilt beneath Danny's feet. He leaned against the warehouse wall, its rough concrete surface grounding him as the doctor continued explaining treatment options and specialists. "The medication is quite expensive," Dr. Matthews said carefully, "and the specialist visits will need to be regular, at least initially. Do you have health insurance?" Danny's basic insurance through work wouldn't cover much. "Some," he managed to say. "Come by the office this afternoon. We'll go through everything in detail and discuss financial assistance programs." The rest of his shift passed in a fog. Danny's muscles moved automatically, lifting and sorting, while his mind spun with worst-case scenarios. He thought about Malcolm's job offer, still sitting like a lifeline just out of reach. The salary Malcolm had mentioned would cover Emma's medical bills. But could he trust it? Could he risk leaving his steady, if inadequate, jobs for something that seemed too good to be true? That afternoon, sitting in Dr. Matthews' office, Danny stared at the papers in front of him. The numbers blurred together. Medication costs, specialist fees, laboratory charges. Even with insurance and assistance programs, the monthly expenses would be more than he could afford on his current income. Emma's face appeared in his mind, her brave smile during the blood tests, her quiet acceptance of pain that no child should have to bear. She deserved better than this. She deserved a father who could provide for her needs without having to choose between medicine and rent. The medical bills spread across his kitchen table that evening after the kids were in bed. Danny had arranged them in neat piles, urgent, soon, and eventually. Each stack represented impossible choices. His fingers traced over the numbers, trying to make them smaller through sheer will. In his pocket, Malcolm's business card seemed to burn against his thigh. The job offer promised security, health insurance, and a salary that could cover these bills with room to breathe. But years of struggle had taught Danny that nothing came without a catch. What if he took the job and it fell through? What if Malcolm changed his mind? The warehouse job wasn't much, but it was dependable. Danny pulled out his worn leather wallet, counting the meager bills inside. His next paycheck was already spoken for rent, utilities, groceries. There wasn't enough left for even one of Emma's prescriptions. The quiet of the house pressed in around him. From down the hall, he could hear Emma's slightly labored breathing, a new symptom the doctor had noticed. Lucas mumbled something in his sleep in the next room. They were depending on him, trusting him to make the right decisions. Danny gathered the medical bills into a pile, his hands shaking slightly. The total amount seemed to glare up at him accusingly. How could he possibly manage this? The pressure of single parenthood had never felt heavier. Every decision, every consequence, rested solely on his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt truly overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. He glanced at Malcolm's card again, wondering if it represented salvation or just another dead end. The choice before him seemed impossible: stay with the familiar struggle or risk everything on an uncertain opportunity. Either way, Emma needed treatment, and he needed to find a way to provide it. The medical bills sat in their neat stack, waiting for an answer he didn't have. Danny rubbed his tired eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. He was one man trying to be everything for his children: provider, protector, parent, and right now, he felt like he was failing at all three. Danny's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, displaying his boss's number. His stomach tightened as he reached for it, already knowing what the conversation would bring. Emma sat on the couch, her face pale and tired, while Lucas played quietly with his toys on the floor. "Hello?" Danny's voice cracked slightly. "Winters, where are you? Your shift started 20 minutes ago." Mr. Peterson's gruff voice came through the line. Danny rubbed his forehead, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "Sir, I'm sorry. Emma's not feeling well, and I needed to." "Again? This is the third time this month, Winters. We've got deadlines to meet." "I know, sir. I'll make up the hours, I promise. I just need today to—" "Listen." Mr. Peterson cut him off, his voice stern. "I understand you're a single father, but this job requires reliability. One more absence, and we'll need to have a serious discussion about your future here." The words hit Danny like a physical blow. "Yes, sir. I understand." After hanging up, Danny leaned against the kitchen counter, his hands trembling slightly. The morning light seemed harsh now, highlighting the worn spots in their carpet and the chipped paint on the walls. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small and worried. "Are you okay?" Danny forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Emma wrapped her arms around herself. "My stomach still hurts. I'm sorry you had to miss work because of me." "Hey, don't worry about that." Danny crossed the room and sat beside her, pulling her close. "You're what matters most, okay?" Lucas looked up from his toys. "Is Emma going to be okay?" "Of course she is, buddy." Danny ruffled his son's hair, but worry gnawed at his insides. The morning dragged on. Danny made soup for Emma, helped Lucas with his homework, and tried not to think about the growing stack of bills on his desk. The medical bills from Emma's recent tests lay unopened, but he knew the numbers would be staggering. Around noon, Emma finally fell asleep on the couch. Danny covered her with a blanket and went to check the mail, dreading what he might find. Another envelope from the hospital waited inside, along with a past due notice from the electric company. In the kitchen, Danny spread the bills across the table, doing mental calculations that never added up. His savings were nearly depleted from the car repairs, and now, with Emma's medical issues, the memory of Malcolm's job offer floated back into his mind. The salary Malcolm had mentioned would solve so many problems. But doubt crept in. Why would a billionaire want to help someone like him? It seemed too good to be true. His phone buzzed again. This time it was the hospital's billing department. "Mr. Winters." The woman's voice was professional but kind. "We're calling about the payment plan we discussed." Danny's throat tightened. "Yes, I know it's due. I just need a little more time." "I understand, but we've already extended the deadline twice, without insurance coverage." "Please," Danny's voice cracked. "My daughter needs these tests. I'll figure something out." After ending the call, Danny sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bills scattered before him. Lucas had fallen asleep next to his sister on the couch, both of them looking peaceful despite everything. Danny pulled out Malcolm's business card from his wallet. It was simple but elegant, with just a phone number embossed in silver. The job offer played through his mind again: a management position, full benefits, including health insurance that would cover Emma's medical needs. He thought about Mr. Peterson's warning, about the mounting bills, about Emma's pale face this morning. The weight of it all pressed down on him until it felt hard to breathe. Outside, a car backfired, making Danny jump. He walked to the window and watched as their elderly neighbor struggled with her groceries. In the past, he would have rushed out to help her, but today he felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the decisions before him. Emma stirred on the couch, whimpering slightly in her sleep. Danny went to her, adjusting the blanket and feeling her forehead, still warm. Another day of missed work loomed tomorrow, unless her fever broke. The choice stretched before him like two diverging paths. One was familiar, the daily struggle, the constant worry, the grinding poverty that seemed to tighten its grip with each passing month. The other path, the one Malcolm offered, was unknown and frightening in its own way, but it held the promise of something better, a chance to break free from this cycle of barely surviving. Danny pulled out his phone again, staring at Malcolm's number. His finger hovered over the keypad as the afternoon light faded, casting the room in shadows. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavy with both hope and fear. His children slept on, unaware of their father's internal struggle. Danny watched them, remembering Malcolm's words about potential and change. The business card felt warm in his hand, like it held some kind of energy all its own. Two paths, two choices. Continue down this exhausting road he knew so well, or take a leap into the unknown with Malcolm's offer. The answer seemed both crystal clear and impossibly murky at the same time. Danny set the phone down and walked to the window again. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a beautiful ending to a difficult day. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Mr. Peterson's warning, Emma's illness, the mounting bills, and Malcolm's mysterious offer that could change everything. Behind him, Emma coughed in her sleep, and the sound seemed to echo through the quiet apartment. The moment stretched out, filled with possibility and fear, hope and uncertainty. Danny stood at his crossroads as the day faded around him, knowing that whatever choice he made would reshape not just his future, but his children's as well. Danny's hands trembled as he dialed Malcolm's number. The phone rang 3 times before Malcolm's calm voice answered. "Danny, I've been hoping to hear from you." "I've thought about your offer," Danny said, his voice catching slightly. "I want to accept the position." "Wonderful news." Malcolm's warmth carried through the line. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 9? We can discuss the details over coffee." The next morning, Danny walked into the elegant coffee shop Malcolm had chosen. The place was nothing like the FoodCourt where they'd first met. Soft jazz played in the background, and the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air. Malcolm sat at a corner table, dressed in a simple but clearly expensive suit. He smiled and gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit down. I took the liberty of ordering you a coffee." Danny lowered himself into the plush chair, feeling out of place in his worn jeans and faded button-down shirt. "Thank you, Mr. Fairweather." "Malcolm, please." He pushed a steaming cup toward Danny. "We're going to be working closely together. No need for formalities." Over the next hour, they discussed the job details. Danny would be managing one of Malcolm's charitable foundations, focusing on helping single parents and their children. The salary made Danny's eyes widen. It was more than triple what he currently made at both his jobs combined. "I don't understand," Danny admitted, staring into his coffee cup. "Why me? I don't have any experience running a foundation." Malcolm leaned back, his eyes distant. "Let me tell you a story, Danny. When I was young, my father worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. One day, a man gave him an opportunity, just a simple chance to prove himself. That chance changed everything for our family." He paused, meeting Danny's gaze. Sometimes, all people need is an opportunity. They met regularly over the next few weeks. Each morning, before Danny started his training, they would sit and talk. Malcolm shared stories about his journey from poverty to success, and Danny found himself opening up about his own struggles. "The hardest part," Danny confided one morning, "is feeling like I'm always letting my kids down. Emma needs these medical treatments, and Lucas, he's never even been to a real baseball game. What kind of father can't take his son to a game?" Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. "My father felt the same way. But you know what I remember most about him? Not what he couldn't give me, but how hard he tried. Your children see that too, Danny." As days passed, Danny began learning the ins and outs of foundation management. Malcolm was patient, explaining everything clearly and never making Danny feel inadequate when he struggled to understand something new. "The key," Malcolm explained during one of their sessions, "is to remember that every decision we make affects real people. We're not just moving money around, we're changing lives." Danny found himself looking forward to their morning meetings. Malcolm wasn't just a boss. He had become a mentor and, surprisingly, a friend. They shared stories about their families, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. One morning, Malcolm arrived looking more serious than usual. "I want to show you something," he said, leading Danny to his car. They drove to a rundown neighborhood that Danny knew all too well. He'd grown up in a place just like it. Malcolm parked in front of a small community center. "This is where I started," he said quietly. 20 years ago, this was just an abandoned building. Now it helps hundreds of families every year." He turned to Danny. "You know why I chose you for this job? Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what these families need. Not just money, but hope." Danny felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he could see beyond his immediate struggles to something bigger. The work they were doing would help families like his own. Still, when he returned home each evening, the weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders. Emma's medical bills continued to pile up, and Lucas needed new school supplies. The new job would help, but it would take time for things to improve. Sitting at his kitchen table one evening, surrounded by bills and medical paperwork, Danny let out a heavy sigh. The job with Malcolm felt like a lifeline, but he couldn't shake the feeling that one wrong move could send everything crashing down. He glanced at the family photo on his refrigerator. Emma and Lucas grinning at the camera, unaware of their father's struggles. The sound of laughter drifted in from the living room where his children were watching TV. Danny smiled despite his worries. Maybe Malcolm was right. Sometimes all you needed was an opportunity. For the first time in years, he could see a path forward, even if that path still seemed daunting. He pulled out his phone and looked at the foundation's website, which he would soon help manage. The tagline read, "Building Better Futures, One Family at a Time." Danny ran his fingers through his hair, feeling both overwhelmed and oddly hopeful. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential to make a real difference. Emma's voice called from the other room, asking for help with their homework. Danny stood up, leaving the bills for later. His new job might be the answer he'd been searching for, but right now, his children needed him. One step at a time, he thought, walking toward the living room. One step at a time, the office building gleamed in the morning sun, its glass windows reflecting the golden light. Danny stood in the lobby, adjusting his new tie for the 10th time. His weathered hands felt out of place against the crisp fabric of his suit, a gift from Malcolm to help him start his new position. "Good morning, Mr. Winters." The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Fairweather is expecting you in the conference room." Danny nodded, still getting used to being addressed so formally. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like entering another world. His old work boots had been replaced by polished dress shoes that squeaked against the marble floors. Malcolm waited in the conference room, surrounded by charts and presentations. "Danny, come in. Ready to learn about corporate investment strategies?" The morning flew by in a blur of terms Danny had never heard before. His head spun with words like portfolio management and diversification. Malcolm was patient, explaining everything clearly, but Danny couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. During lunch break, Danny's phone buzzed. Emma's school nurse was calling. His daughter's fever had returned, and she needed to go home. Danny's stomach clenched as he excused himself from an important meeting. "Family comes first," Malcolm assured him. "We'll catch you up tomorrow." The drive to Emma's school was tense. Danny's mind raced between worry for his daughter and concern about leaving work early on his third day. Emma's face was flushed when he picked her up, her usually bright eyes dulled by fever. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered as he helped her into the car. "I tried to stay at school." "Don't apologize, sweetheart," Danny said, his heart aching. "You need rest." At home, Danny set Emma up on the couch with blankets and soup. He tried to work remotely, balancing his laptop on the kitchen counter while keeping an eye on her. The medical bills from her last hospital visit lay unopened on the table, a constant reminder of the mounting costs. That evening, after picking up Lucas from after-school care, Danny struggled to help with homework while reviewing the materials Malcolm had given him. His son's math problems blurred together with investment charts, and Danny felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on his shoulders. "Dad, I don't understand this problem," Lucas said, pointing to his worksheet. "Just give me a minute, buddy," Danny replied, rubbing his temples. The numbers on his own work documents weren't making sense either. Emma's cough echoed from the living room, followed by a weak call. "Daddy?" Danny found her burning up again. The thermometer read 102.5 degrees Fahrenheit. His hand shook as he called the after-hours nurse line. They recommended bringing her to the emergency room if the fever didn't break soon. The next day at work, Danny could barely focus. His eyes were heavy from a night of checking on Emma, and the financial statements in front of him might as well have been written in another language. Malcolm noticed his distraction during their morning meeting. "Everything all right, Danny?" he asked after the other executives left the room. "Emma's sick again," Danny admitted. "The doctors want to run more tests, but—" He trailed off, not wanting to mention the cost. Malcolm's face softened with understanding. "Take the time you need. The work will wait." But Danny knew it wouldn't wait forever. He needed to prove himself worthy of this opportunity. The pressure to succeed, to provide for his children, to justify Malcolm's faith in him, it all felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. The week continued in a blur of hospital visits, late-night study sessions, and worried calls from Emma's doctors. Danny's savings dwindled as the medical bills piled up. Even with his new salary, it wasn't enough to keep up with the mounting expenses. Friday evening found Danny sitting in his parked car outside their apartment building. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the streetlight cast long shadows across the dashboard. In his hand, he held Emma's latest prescription, another medication they could barely afford. He looked up at their apartment window, where a soft light glowed. The babysitter was watching the kids while he worked late, trying to catch up on everything he'd missed. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed to be enough. Danny's reflection in the rearview mirror showed a man he barely recognized. Tired eyes, worry lines, etched deeper than before. Despite the nice suit, despite the prestigious job, despite Malcolm's mentorship, he felt like he was drowning. The distance between where he was and where his children needed him to be seemed to grow larger every day. A sob caught in his throat as he gripped the steering wheel. Emma needed him to be stronger, smarter, better. Lucas needed a father who could help with homework without getting confused. They both deserved so much more than what he could give them. The prescription paper crumpled in his fist as tears blurred his vision. He'd traded his physical exhaustion from manual labor for a mental exhaustion that felt even heavier. The new job was supposed to be their salvation, but right now, sitting alone in his car, Danny felt further from saving his family than ever before. Danny sat at his new desk, staring at the computer screen with tired but determined eyes. The office buzzed with quiet activity around him, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, conversations flowing. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as he worked on a spreadsheet, each number carefully entered. "Hey Danny, how's it going?" Sarah from accounting walked by, giving him a friendly wave. "Getting there," Danny replied with a small smile. It wasn't a lie. He was making progress, even if it felt painfully slow sometimes. The past few weeks had been a blur of training sessions and learning new software. His hands, more accustomed to manual labor, were still adjusting to office work. But there was something satisfying about mastering each new skill, about understanding more of the business world that had always seemed so far removed from his life. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Dad, the doctor's office called. They got the paperwork from the charity." Danny's heart lifted. He remembered the day Malcolm had mentioned the Children's Medical Foundation, an organization that helped families cover expensive treatments. At first, Danny had been hesitant to apply. Pride was a hard thing to swallow. But Malcolm had simply placed the application on his desk and walked away, leaving Danny to make his own choice. "That's great news, sweetheart," he texted back. "We'll talk more when I get home." Looking at the family photo on his desk, Emma and Lucas grinning at the camera during their last trip to the park, Danny felt a wave of emotion wash over him. The kids had been so patient through all of this, never complaining when dinner was simple or when they had to skip activities that cost too much. His office phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. "Danny Winters speaking," he answered, still getting used to the formal tone required in the corporate world. "Mr. Winters, this is Dr. Martinez's office. We've received confirmation from the Children's Medical Foundation. They'll be covering 80% of Emma's treatment costs." Danny's hand gripped the phone tighter. 80%? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir, and we can work out a payment plan for the remaining amount. Would you like to schedule Emma's first appointment?" After arranging the details, Danny leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. The mountain of medical bills that had been keeping him awake at night suddenly seemed less insurmountable. Later that afternoon, Malcolm stopped by his desk. He wore his usual subtle smile, the one that seemed to say he knew more than he let on. "How are things progressing, Danny?" "Better," Danny replied, standing up out of respect. "The foundation. They're going to help with Emma's treatment. I can't thank you enough for telling me about them." Malcolm held up a hand. "You did the work. You filled out the application, provided the documentation, made the calls. I simply pointed you in the right direction." Danny nodded. thinking about how different things were from just a few weeks ago. His new salary, while not extravagant, meant he could finally start building a small emergency fund. He'd even managed to get his car fixed properly instead of just patching it up temporarily. "You're doing well here," Malcolm continued, gesturing at Danny's organized desk. "The team speaks highly of your attention to detail." "I'm trying," Danny said honestly. "There's still so much to learn, but you're learning it," Malcolm finished. "That's what matters." After Malcolm left, Danny opened his email to find a message from his supervisor praising his latest project. It wasn't a big assignment, just organizing some client data, but the recognition felt good. He'd worried that his lack of experience would hold him back, but his work ethic seemed to be making up for it. During his lunch break, Danny walked to the small park across from the office building. The spring air was warm, and other office workers sat on benches, enjoying their breaks. He unwrapped the sandwich he'd packed, still careful with money despite his improved situation, and checked his budget on his phone. For the first time in years, the numbers didn't look completely impossible. Between his new salary and the medical charity's help, he could see a path forward. It wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, and he needed to build up his savings. But it was better than before. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lucas, sending a photo of an art project he'd made at school. Danny smiled, remembering how his son used to hide his artwork, afraid it wasn't good enough. Lately, Lucas had been more confident, more willing to share his creativity. Maybe he sensed the change in their family's atmosphere, the lifting of some of the constant stress. Walking back to the office, Danny passed the mall where he'd first met Malcolm. The food court where he used to eat his children's leftovers seemed like a lifetime ago. Though it had only been a few months, he still practiced careful spending. Old habits died hard, but now he could occasionally treat the kids to a proper meal out without feeling guilty. Back at his desk, Danny pulled up the training manual for the new software system they'd be implementing next month. He still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just treading water. Emma's medical appointments were scheduled. His car was running properly. He had a job that offered opportunities for advancement. The crushing weight of constant crisis had lifted enough for him to take a full breath. As he worked through the afternoon, Danny thought about Malcolm's words from their first meeting. "You don't have to be stuck in this cycle forever." At the time, it had seemed like an empty platitude. Now, he understood it was simply the truth. Change was possible, difficult and slow, but possible. Before leaving for the day, Danny updated his to-do list for tomorrow. His handwriting had improved from all the note-taking during training, becoming more confident and clear, like his outlook on the future. He smiled slightly as he gathered his things, thinking about having dinner with his kids tonight. They'd have time to talk about their days, plan for the weekend, maybe even play a board game after homework was done. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead, bills to manage, and skills to master. But for the first time and longer than he could remember, Danny felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, solid hope, built on tangible progress rather than desperate wishes. Danny checked his phone. It was a text from Emma's doctor. His heart skipped a beat, but as he read the message, a warm smile spread across his face. Emma's latest test results showed significant improvement. The treatments were working. He glanced at the small photo frame on his desk, showing Emma and Lucas at the park last weekend. Emma's cheeks were rosy again, her smile bright and genuine. It was a stark contrast to how pale and tired she had looked just a month ago. The office clock showed 4:45 p.m. For the first time in years, Danny wasn't rushing to a second job or worrying about making ends meet. Instead, he was looking forward to picking up his kids from their after-school program and spending a real evening with them. As he drove to the school, memories of recent weeks filled his mind. The relief on Emma's face when she learned they could afford her treatments, Lucas's excitement when Danny could finally attend his school play, small moments that meant everything. The after-school program coordinator, Mrs. Martinez, greeted him with a warm smile. "Emma's been showing everyone her art project," she said. "She's got such talent." Danny found his children in the art room. Emma was explaining her watercolor painting to Lucas, who listened with unusual attention. Both kids looked up when they saw him. "Dad!" Emma rushed over, her painting held carefully in front of her. "Look what I made today!" Danny knelt down to examine the artwork, a beautiful sunset over what appeared to be their apartment building. The colors blended together perfectly, creating a warm, hopeful scene. "This is amazing, sweetheart," he said, meaning every word. "We'll have to frame this one." Lucas tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go to the park today, Dad? You promised we could if Emma felt better." Danny checked his watch. There was still plenty of daylight left. And more importantly, he had the energy to take them. No exhaustion from working double shifts, no stress about missing bill payments. "The park it is," he said, watching their faces light up. At the park, Danny sat on a bench while his children played on the swings. Emma's laughter carried across the playground as Lucas pushed her higher. Her strength was returning. She could play longer now without getting tired, and her appetite had improved significantly. A young couple walked by with their dog, and Danny overheard snippets of their conversation about mortgage rates and work stress. He remembered when such discussions would have sent anxiety coursing through his veins. Now, thanks to his new job and Malcolm's guidance, he had started putting money aside in a savings account. It wasn't much yet, but it was more than he'd ever had before. Emma and Lucas ran over, their cheeks flushed from playing. "Can we get ice cream?" Lucas asked, pointing to the small shop across the street. A few months ago, this simple request would have forced Danny to make excuses or painfully deny them. Now, he stood up with a smile. "Sure, why not? You've both been amazing lately." As they walked to the ice cream shop, Emma slipped her hand into his. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm really glad you're not so sad anymore." Danny squeezed her hand, touched by her observation. Children noticed more than adults gave them credit for. "I'm glad too, sweetie." They sat at a small table outside the ice cream shop, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors similar to Emma's watercolor. Lucas had chocolate ice cream smeared around his mouth, and Emma was carefully eating her strawberry cone, trying not to let it drip. "You know what?" Emma said between licks. "I think this is the best day ever." Danny looked at his children, really looked at them. Lucas's untied shoelaces and messy hair, Emma's bright eyes, and the healthy color in her cheeks, both of them simply enjoying their ice cream without a care in the world. This was what he'd always wanted for them, not just survival, but the chance to be kids, to enjoy simple pleasures without the weight of adult worries. Back home, after homework was done and dinner was eaten, Danny helped Emma hang her watercolor painting on the wall. Lucas insisted on helping, holding the hammer with serious concentration as Danny showed him how to tap the nail in carefully. "It looks perfect there," Emma declared, stepping back to admire her work. Danny had to agree. The sunset in the painting seemed to glow against their plain wall, making their modest apartment feel warmer somehow. It was a reminder of how far they'd come, not just in terms of Emma's health or their financial situation, but in their ability to appreciate these moments together. As he tucked them into bed that night, Danny felt a deep sense of peace. Emma was getting better. Lucas was thriving in school, and he, for the first time in years, wasn't lying awake at night wondering how to make it through another day. Sitting on the couch later, Danny picked up Emma's latest medical report. The numbers and charts that had once terrified him now showed progress. Real, measurable improvement. The treatments were expensive, but between his new salary and the assistance from Malcolm's charity foundation, they were managing. He thought about Malcolm's words from their first meeting in the food court. "You don't have to be stuck in this cycle forever." At the time, it had seemed impossible to believe. But now, looking around at their home, at Emma's artwork on the wall, at Lucas's school awards on the shelf, at the stack of bills that no longer caused him panic attacks, Danny realized that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. His phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "How's Emma doing?" Danny smiled as he typed his reply, sharing the good news about her test results. Malcolm's response came quickly. "Wonderful news. Keep believing in yourself, Danny. You're doing great things for your family." Looking at the message, Danny felt a surge of gratitude. His life had transformed not just because of Malcolm's help, but because he'd found the courage to accept it, to believe in the possibility of change. His children were happier and healthier, and for the first time in years, he could see a future filled with hope instead of constant struggle. The morning started like any other at Malcolm's company. Danny sat at his desk, reviewing spreadsheets and financial reports. His new position as a junior financial analyst was challenging, but he'd been getting better at it every day. The office buzzed with the usual activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and the gentle hum of conversations. Danny's fingers flew across the keyboard as he input numbers into the quarterly report. He had promised Malcolm he'd have it ready by lunch, and he was determined to prove himself worthy of the trust placed in him. A small photo of Emma and Lucas smiled at him from his desk, reminding him of why he worked so hard. The morning coffee sat cold and forgotten beside him when his computer screen suddenly froze. Danny's heart rate quickened as he realized what had happened. He had been working on the main spreadsheet without saving a backup copy. When the system came back online, half of the numbers were gone. 3 hours of work vanished. No, he muttered, frantically clicking through different folders. His palms grew sweaty as he searched for any trace of the lost data. The deadline was approaching, and the missing information was crucial for the company's quarterly meeting. Sarah, his colleague from the next cubicle, noticed his distress. "Everything okay, Danny?" He shook his head, running his hands through his hair. "I lost the Henderson account data. All of it." His voice cracked slightly. "The meeting's in 2 hours." The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just about missing numbers. This was about trust. Malcolm had given him this chance, had believed in him when nobody else would. And now, with one careless error, Danny felt like he was proving all his doubters right. His mind raced back to Emma's medical bills, to Lucas's upcoming school expenses. The job at Malcolm's company had been a lifeline, allowing him to finally provide for his children without working himself to exhaustion. The thought of losing it all because of one mistake made his stomach churn. Danny's hands trembled as he picked up his phone to call the Henderson office. Maybe they could send the numbers again, but what would that say about his competence? He could already imagine the disapproving looks, the whispered conversations, the same ones he'd faced all his life when things went wrong. The office seemed to close in around him. The familiar sounds of workplace activity now felt distant and muffled, as if he were underwater. He loosened his tie, feeling like it was choking him. "I need some air," he mumbled to no one in particular, pushing back from his desk. The break room was empty when he entered, and he leaned against the counter trying to steady his breathing. Through the window, he could see the city sprawling below, peaceful and unaware of his crisis. "Rough morning?" The quiet voice made Danny jump. Malcolm stood in the doorway, his presence as unassuming as always despite his expensive suit. Danny straightened up immediately, his face flushing. "Mr. Fairweather, I made a mistake with the Henderson report. The system crashed, and I lost the data. I'm so sorry. I know how important this meeting is, and Malcolm held up a hand, cutting off Danny's rushed explanation. He walked to the coffee maker and poured 2 cups, handling one to Danny. "Tell me something," he said, stirring sugar into his own cup. "How many mistakes do you think I made before I built this company?" Danny blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know." "Hundreds," Malcolm said simply. "Maybe thousands. Some of them cost me millions of dollars. Others cost me relationships, but each one taught me something." He took a sip of his coffee, looking out the window. "You know what the biggest mistake is?" Danny shook his head, letting fear of failure stop you from trying again. Malcolm turned to face him fully. "The data can be retrieved. Technology these days is pretty good at that. But the lesson here isn't about backing up files, though that's important too." Danny felt some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he listened. Malcolm's calm demeanor was contagious, making the situation feel less catastrophic. "When I first started out," Malcolm continued, "I lost an entire week's worth of financial projections the night before a major presentation. I thought my career was over before it began." He chuckled softly. "But instead of giving up, I stayed up all night, rebuilt everything from memory, and made it work. Was it perfect? No, but it showed me what I was capable of when pushed to my limits." Danny took a deep breath, his mind already starting to work on solutions rather than dwelling on the problem. "I could call Henderson's office, get the original figures. If I start now, I might be able to reconstruct most of it before the meeting." Malcolm nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking like someone who solves problems instead of someone who fears them." He placed his coffee cup in the sink. "And Danny, the meeting's been pushed to tomorrow morning. Sometimes the universe gives us a little breathing room." Relief flooded through Danny's body, but it was more than just the extended deadline. It was the realization that making a mistake hadn't ended everything, that there was still a path forward. "Thank you, Mr. Fairweather," Danny said quietly, "not just for understanding about the report, but for everything." Malcolm smiled, that same enigmatic smile he'd worn in the food court all those months ago. "You're doing fine, Danny. Better than fine. Remember, it's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about how we handle them when they happen." As Malcolm left the break room, Danny felt his confidence slowly returning. He looked at his reflection in the window. He saw the same tired eyes and worried lines, but there was something else there now. Determination. Resilience. He pulled out his phone and dialed the Henderson office. This setback wouldn't define him. Just like all the other challenges he'd faced, he would find a way through this one too. His children had taught him that giving up wasn't an option, and Malcolm had shown him that mistakes were just part of the journey. Danny stared at the eviction notice in his trembling hands. The paper felt heavy, like it carried the weight of all his fears. Sitting at his small kitchen table, He read the words again, hoping they might somehow change. Payment due by end of month or vacate premises. The dim light from the ceiling fan cast shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Outside, through the thin walls of their apartment, he could hear the sounds of traffic and distant sirens, the soundtrack of their modest neighborhood. His children's drawings decorated the refrigerator, bright spots of color in their otherwise plain kitchen. "Dad?" Emma's voice startled him. He quickly folded the notice and slipped it into his pocket. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. "Is everything okay?" Danny forced a smile. "Of course, sweetie. Just looking at some boring grown-up papers. Shouldn't you be getting ready for school?" Emma nodded but lingered for a moment, her eyes searching his face. She was too perceptive for her age, often picking up on his worries, even when he tried to hide them. Finally, she turned and padded back to her room. Once she was gone, Danny pulled out the notice again. The number swam before his eyes. 3 months behind on rent, total due $2,850. His new job at Malcolm's company paid better than his previous positions, but Emma's medical bills had eaten through his savings. He'd been juggling expenses, paying just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge, hoping to catch up on the rent when things got better. The morning routine felt like a blur. He packed lunches, helped Lucas tie his shoes, and made sure Emma had her medication. All the while, the eviction notice burned in his pocket like a hot coal. As he drove the kids to school in their recently repaired car, his mind raced through possibilities. A second job? A loan? Moving to an even smaller place? "Have a great day," he called out as his children climbed out of the car. They waved goodbye, their backpacks bouncing as they joined the stream of students heading into the building. Watching them walk away, Danny felt a crushing wave of guilt. They deserved so much better than this constant uncertainty. At work, Danny couldn't focus. The financial reports on his computer screen blurred together as his thoughts kept returning to the eviction notice. His desk phone rang twice, but he let it go to voicemail. The office around him hummed with activity, people chatting, printers whirring, keyboards clicking, but he felt removed from it all, trapped in his private bubble of anxiety. During his lunch break, Danny sat alone in the break room, picking at a sandwich he'd brought from home. He'd already cut every possible expense. No cable TV, no new clothes, no eating out. The kids hadn't complained, but he saw how Emma looked longingly at her friend's new shoes, how Lucas's face fell when he couldn't join his classmates for pizza after school. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Danny made 3 mistakes in his reports, earning a concerned look from his supervisor. His hands shook slightly as he typed, and he had to keep wiping his palms on his pants. The thought of his children having to leave their school, their friends, everything familiar, it was almost too much to bear. By 5 o'clock, Danny felt like he was drowning. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and horn honks. He barely registered the familiar streets of their neighborhood, the same route he'd driven hundreds of times before. As he pulled into their apartment complex's parking lot, he noticed a maintenance worker replacing the lock on their neighbor's door. The sight made his stomach clench. Inside their apartment, Emma and Lucas worked on their homework at the kitchen table. The sight of them, heads bent over their books, pencils moving carefully across paper, made Danny's throat tight. They were so innocent, so trusting that their father would take care of everything. How could he tell them they might have to leave their home? After dinner, a simple meal of pasta and sauce, Danny sat on the edge of his bed, holding his phone. Malcolm's business card lay on the nightstand, the elegant typeface catching the light from his bedside lamp. Pride warred with desperation in his chest. He'd always handled things on his own, never asked for help. But this wasn't just about him anymore. His finger hovered over Malcolm's number. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emma practicing her reading aloud to Lucas, her voice careful and determined on the difficult words. The sound made his decision for him. With trembling fingers, Danny dialed the number. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. He almost hung up twice, but the image of his children's faces kept his hand steady. "Hello?" Malcolm's familiar voice answered. Danny took a deep breath. "Mr. Fairweather? This is Danny Winters. I need your help." His voice cracked on the last word, and he had to stop. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like forever. Danny closed his eyes, fighting back the burning sensation of tears. He'd spent so long being strong, handling everything alone. Admitting he needed help felt like admitting defeat. But as he listened to his children's voices from the other room, he knew he had to swallow his pride. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about Emma's future doctor appointments, about Lucas's dream of joining the soccer team, about giving them the stability they deserved. Sometimes being strong meant knowing when to ask for help. Malcolm still hadn't spoken, and Danny's heart hammered in his chest as he waited for a response. The card trembled in his free hand, a symbol of both hope and uncertainty. Whatever came next, he knew he had to face it. For his children's sake. Malcolm's office felt different this time. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow across the polished desk where Danny sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The eviction notice lay between them like a heavy weight. Malcolm studied the paper without speaking, his expression thoughtful. Danny's heart hammered in his chest as he waited. The silence stretched on, broken only by the gentle hum of the building's air conditioning. "I'm sorry," Danny finally said, his voice rough. "I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. I've tried everything else." His throat felt tight with shame. After all, Malcolm had done for him already. Here he was, asking for more help. Malcolm looked up, his eyes kind. "Danny, do you remember our first conversation in the food court?" Danny nodded, thinking back to that day when he'd opened up to a stranger in a janitor's uniform. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I told you that change comes when you least expect it," Malcolm continued, leaning back in his chair. "But what I didn't tell you is that change also requires courage. It takes courage to ask for help when you need it." Danny's shoulders slumped with relief at Malcolm's words. "I've always handled everything on my own," he admitted. "Ever since Sarah left, I felt like I had to prove I could do it all." Malcolm stood up and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "You know, Danny, I see a lot of myself in you. When I was starting out, I was too proud to ask for help, almost lost everything because of it." He turned back to face Danny. "That's why I spend time in the food court, watching people. Sometimes the ones who need help the most are the last ones to ask for it." Danny watched as Malcolm returned to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder and began writing something. "Here's what we're going to do," Malcolm said, his pen moving across paper. "I'm going to loan you the money for the rent. No interest, no rushing to pay it back. You'll repay it when you can, at your own pace." Danny's eyes widened. Malcolm held up a hand. "Let me finish. This isn't charity, Danny. It's an investment in someone I believe in, someone who's shown me time and again that he's willing to work hard and do whatever it takes for his children." Danny felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back, overwhelmed by the gesture. "But there's one condition," Malcolm added, sliding the paper across the desk. "You have to stop thinking you're in this alone. Emma and Lucas need their father to be strong, yes, but they also need him to be whole. Being strong sometimes means knowing when to lean on others." Danny picked up the document, a simple loan agreement with terms more generous than he could have imagined. His vision blurred as he read the words. "I don't know how to thank you," he managed to say. Malcolm smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Thank me by proving me right. Show me that my faith in you isn't misplaced." He paused, then added softly, "And maybe someday, when you're in a position to help someone else who's struggling, you'll remember this moment." As Danny signed the agreement, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just the relief of knowing he and his children wouldn't lose their home. It was something deeper, a realization that had been slowly building since that first encounter in the food court. Malcolm wasn't just offering money. He was offering something far more valuable: trust, friendship, a belief in Danny's potential that went beyond his current circumstances. The loan wasn't a handout. It was a hand up, offered with dignity and respect. Danny thought about all the times he'd refused help, thinking it made him weak. All the nights he'd laid awake, carrying the weight of his struggles alone. He thought about Emma and Lucas, and how they watched him, learning from his example. "You're right," Danny said, meeting Malcolm's gaze. "I've been so focused on being strong for my kids that I forgot to show them something just as important: how to accept help with grace when it's offered." Malcolm nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's a valuable lesson too, Danny. One that took me far too long to learn myself." As they shook hands across the desk, Danny felt lighter than he had in years. The eviction notice that had seemed so threatening now looked like just another piece of paper. More importantly, he understood that the real gift wasn't the money. It was the trust Malcolm had placed in him, and the friendship that had grown between them. Malcolm walked him to the door, then paused. "You know, Danny, sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves." Danny thought about those walls, the ones he'd built so carefully over the years, thinking they would protect him and his children. Now he realized that sometimes those same walls could become a prison, keeping out not just pain, but also the help and connection he desperately needed. As he left Malcolm's office, Danny's steps were steady and sure. The weight of his burdens felt lighter, shared now with someone who believed in him. He understood that true strength wasn't about carrying everything alone. It was about having the courage to reach out when you needed it most. The early autumn breeze rustled through the park's maple trees, sending golden leaves dancing through the air. Danny watched as Emma and Lucas raced ahead on the winding path, their laughter echoing across the open space. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in warm, honey-colored light. "Dad, look!" Emma called out, pointing to a group of ducks waddling near the pond. Her cheeks were flushed from running, and her eyes sparkled with joy. The sight made Danny's heart swell. Just a few months ago, she had been too weak to run, the medical treatments taking their toll. Now, she was full of energy again. Lucas trailed behind his sister, stopping to collect particularly colorful leaves. "Can we feed the ducks, Dad?" he asked, already digging in his pocket for the bread they brought along. "Sure, buddy." Danny smiled, remembering how many times they'd done this before. But back then, the weight of worry had always pressed down on his shoulders, making even these simple pleasures feel bittersweet. They made their way to a wooden bench near the pond. Danny sat down, watching his children toss small pieces of bread to the eager ducks. The scene before him felt almost surreal, peaceful, ordinary, yet somehow extraordinary in its simplicity. His mind drifted back to those endless days of working 2 jobs, of counting every penny, of lying awake at night wondering how he'd make it through another week. The memory of that first meeting with Malcolm in the food court seemed like something from another lifetime. The tired janitor, who turned out to be so much more. Emma's delighted squeal pulled him back to the present as a bold duck waddled closer to snatch a piece of bread from her hand. "Did you see that, Dad?" she called out. Her face lit up with excitement. "I saw it, sweetheart," Danny replied, marveling at how different she looked now. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the worried frown that had creased her young forehead was gone. The medical treatments that had once seemed impossibly out of reach had worked wonders. Lucas plopped down beside him on the bench, his small collection of leaves carefully arranged on his lap. "Dad, can we make a leaf collection at home, like the one we saw in that book?" "Of course we can," Danny answered, ruffling his son's hair. There was a time when he would have hesitated, knowing that even simple craft supplies were a luxury they couldn't afford. Now, he could say yes without that familiar pang of guilt and worry. The new job Malcolm had given him had changed everything. It wasn't just the steady paycheck or the health insurance, though those things had made an enormous difference. It was the dignity of doing work he was proud of being able to provide for his children without running himself into the ground. Emma joined them on the bench, sandwiching Danny between his 2 children. She leaned against his arm, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "This is nice," she said simply. Danny wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them close. The late afternoon sun warmed their faces, and somewhere nearby, a robin was singing. The moment felt perfect in its ordinariness. No crisis to handle, no bills to worry about, no exhaustion weighing him down. "Remember when we used to come here before?" Lucas asked, carefully arranging his leaves by color. "You always look so tired, Dad." The observation, so innocent and honest, made Danny's throat tight with emotion. Children noticed everything, even when you tried to hide it from them. "I was tired," he admitted. "But things are different now." "Because of Mr. Malcolm?" Emma asked, looking up at him with knowing eyes. Danny nodded slowly. "Because of Mr. Malcolm, and because sometimes life surprises you in good ways. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. The ducks had wandered off to the other side of the pond, and the evening air was growing cooler. Danny thought about how far they'd come, not just in terms of their improved circumstances, but in the way they felt as a family. The constant strain that had colored their relationships had lifted, replaced by a lighter, more joyful connection. "Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Lucas asked hopefully. "Sure," Danny replied, and the simple pleasure of being able to say yes without mental calculations made him smile. As they gathered their things to leave, Danny took one last look around the park. The setting sun had turned the sky into a canvas of pink and gold, and the autumn leaves seemed to glow from within. He felt something settle in his chest, a quiet certainty that they were going to be okay. The path home wound through the park, and as they walked, Danny listened to his children's chatter about their plans for the weekend. Emma wanted to start a garden in the spring, and Lucas was excited about his upcoming science fair project. Simple dreams, but ones that now felt achievable. The weight that had lived in Danny's chest for so long had lifted, replaced by something lighter, hope, maybe, or contentment. The future stretched out before them, not as a threat, but as a promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, He knew they would face them together, stronger for what they'd been through. Danny sat in Malcolm's office, fidgeting with his tie. The room was spacious, but somehow felt warm and inviting, with afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Malcolm's desk, though made of expensive wood, had family photos scattered across it, a detail that always made Danny feel more at ease. "Danny," Malcolm began, his voice carrying its usual calm tone, "I've been watching Emma's progress in school." He pulled out a manila envelope from his desk drawer. "Her teachers tell me she's exceptionally bright." Danny's chest swelled with pride. "She works really hard. Even with everything that's happened with her health, she never lets it slow her down." Malcolm nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you today." He slid the envelope across the desk. "Open it." With careful fingers, Danny lifted the flap and pulled out several glossy brochures. His eyes widened as he recognized the name of Riverside Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the area. His heart started racing. He'd seen their tuition rates before, and they were far beyond anything he could afford, even with his improved situation. "Malcolm, keep reading," Malcolm encouraged, leaning back in his chair. Danny's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out an official letter. The words, "Full academic scholarship," jumped out at him, followed by Emma's name. The room seemed to spin for a moment as he tried to process what he was seeing. "I don't understand," Danny managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "The Fairweather Foundation has a scholarship program for exceptional students who've overcome significant challenges. Emma's application was reviewed by the board, and they were unanimous in their decision." Danny blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "Application? But we never." "I hope you'll forgive me," Malcolm said, looking slightly sheepish. "I took the liberty of submitting her school records and medical history. Your daughter's resilience impressed everyone on the board." The tears won out, and Danny quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Malcolm replied simply. "Emma deserves every opportunity we can give her." Danny looked down at the brochures again, seeing images of state-of-the-art science labs, music rooms, and sports facilities. He thought about Emma's face lighting up whenever she learned something new, how she'd fight through her fatigue to finish her homework, how she never complained about their circumstances. "The scholarship covers everything," Malcolm continued. "Tuition, books, uniforms, even transportation. She can start next semester if you'd like." Danny's mind raced back to that first day in the food court, eating leftover chicken nuggets and wondering if anything would ever change. Now here he sat, holding the key to his daughter's future in his trembling hands. "I don't know how to thank you," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. Malcolm stood up and walked around his desk, placing a hand on Danny's shoulder. "You already have, Danny. You've shown what determination and hard work can accomplish. Emma inherited those traits from you." Danny carefully placed the papers back in the envelope, treating them like precious artifacts. "When I first met you, sweeping those floors in the mall, I never imagined." "Life has a way of surprising us," Malcolm said, smiling. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments." Danny stood up, clutching the envelope to his chest. "Emma's going to be over the moon when she hears about this. She's always wanted to join a proper science club." "Riverside has one of the best STEM programs in the state," Malcolm confirmed. "And from what I hear, they could use a bright young mind like hers." Danny took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. "You know, when you first offered me that job, I almost didn't take it. I was so scared of change, so used to just getting by." "But you did take it," Malcolm reminded him. "You took a chance on yourself, and that's why we're here today." Looking around the office, Danny thought about how far he'd come from those desperate days of working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. His new position had given him not just financial stability, but dignity. And now, this gift for Emma, it was more than he'd ever dared to hope for. "I should head home," Danny said, checking his watch. "Emma will be back from her friend's house soon, and I want to tell her the news in person." Malcolm walked him to the door, then paused. "Danny, remember something. This scholarship, it's not charity. Emma earned it with her hard work and determination, just like you've earned everything you've achieved these past months." Danny nodded, grateful for Malcolm's understanding of his pride. "Thank you, Malcolm, not just for this, but for believing in us when nobody else did." As Danny turned to leave, Malcolm called out one last time. "Oh, and Danny, make sure to take a video of Emma's reaction. The board would love to see it at the next scholarship ceremony." Danny walked out of the office with his head held high, the envelope tucked safely under his arm. The future he'd always dreamed of for his children was finally within reach, and he could hardly wait to share the news with Emma. The morning sun filtered through the office windows as Danny organized his desk, arranging the family photos he'd finally felt comfortable displaying. His new nameplate gleamed: Daniel Winters, Senior Operations Manager. The promotion had come as a surprise, though Malcolm later admitted he'd been watching Danny's progress closely over the past months. Danny picked up the framed photo of Emma and Lucas, taken at the park just last weekend. Their smiles were brighter now, more carefree. Emma's health had improved significantly since starting her treatments, and Lucas was thriving in his after-school programs. For the first time in years, Danny felt like he could breathe easily. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, his new assistant. "Monthly reports are ready for your review, Mr. Winters." He smiled, still not used to being addressed so formally. Just 6 months ago, he'd been struggling to make ends meet. Now, he had a team reporting to him and a salary that allowed him to provide for his family comfortably. The morning meeting went smoothly. Danny presented the quarterly projections with confidence, his voice steady and sure. He remembered his first presentation, how his hands had trembled as he'd clicked through the slides. Today, he moved through the material effortlessly, fielding questions from the board members with ease. "Excellent work, Danny," Malcolm said after the meeting, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've really grown into this role." Danny nodded, grateful but humble. "I had a good teacher." "You did the work?" Malcolm replied. "I just opened the door." Back at his desk, Danny reviewed the latest financial statement from his bank. His savings account was growing steadily, and he'd even started a college fund for the kids. The thought made his chest swell with pride. He remembered the days of counting pennies for gas money, of choosing between paying the electric bill or buying new shoes for the kids. At lunchtime, Danny walked to the break room, where his coworkers greeted him warmly. He was no longer the outsider, the new guy with the mysterious connection to Malcolm. He'd earned their respect through hard work and dedication. "Hey, Danny," called Mike from accounting. "We're still on for the softball game this weekend, right? Lucas is welcome to join the junior league if he's interested." "Thanks, Mike. He's actually pretty excited about it." Danny smiled, thinking about how his son had been practicing his swing in the backyard. The afternoon passed quickly with meetings and project reviews. Danny's new position kept him busy, but it was fulfilling work. He checked his watch, realizing he could leave early today, something that would have been impossible in his old jobs. On his way out, he stopped by Malcolm's office. The older man was back in his janitorial uniform, preparing for his evening rounds. "You know," Danny said, leaning against the doorframe, "I finally understand why you do that." Malcolm looked up, his eyes twinkling. "Do what?" "The Janitor Act. It keeps you grounded, doesn't it? Helps you remember where you came from." Malcolm nodded slowly. "It's easy to lose yourself in success, to forget what it means to struggle. This reminds me why I started my foundation in the first place." Danny understood now. His own success hadn't made him forget his hardships. Instead, it had given him perspective and empathy for others in similar situations. Driving home, Danny noticed how different everything looked now. The same streets he'd once driven in a broken-down car, worried about making it to his next paycheck, now felt full of possibility. He pulled into the driveway of their home. They'd been able to stay, thanks to Malcolm's help, and Danny had even made some improvements to the property. Emma and Lucas burst out the front door as soon as they heard his car. The babysitter, Mrs. Rodriguez, waved from the porch. Danny could now afford reliable childcare, another blessing he didn't take for granted. "Daddy!" Emma wrapped her arms around his waist. Her cheeks were rosy, a stark contrast to the pale, sickly color they'd been before her treatments. "I got an A on my science project." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Danny hugged her tight, remembering the nights he'd helped her study while worrying about medical bills. Lucas bounced around them, clutching a paper in his hand. "Look, Dad, I made the honor roll." Danny scooped him up, his heart swelling with pride. "I knew you could do it, buddy. How about we celebrate?" The kids cheered as Danny led them inside. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of their improving life. New curtains Emma had picked out, Lucas's art projects on the walls, and family photos everywhere. The refrigerator was full, the bills were paid, and there was even money left over for small luxuries. "Pizza night?" Lucas suggested hopefully. "Better," Danny replied. "How about we go to that new restaurant you've been wanting to try? The one with the arcade?" The kids' eyes widened with excitement. As they got ready to go out, Danny watched them chattering happily about their day. Emma's medication schedule was now manageable, and her doctors were optimistic about her progress. Lucas had joined the school's chess club, something Danny could never have afforded before. In the car, Danny listened to his children's animated conversation, their voices full of joy and excitement about the future. Emma talked about wanting to become a doctor, while Lucas described his latest art project. Their dreams were no longer limited by their circumstances. At a red light, Danny caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The worry lines on his face had softened, and the constant look of exhaustion had been replaced by something else: hope, contentment, and pride. He remembered Malcolm's words from that first meeting in the food court. Change comes when you least expect it. The restaurant was busy, but they had a reservation, another small luxury Danny still marveled at. As they settled into their booth, Emma and Lucas eagerly examining the menus, Danny felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her menu, "are you okay? You're smiling really big." Danny reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm just happy we're here together." Lucas put down his menu. "Can we get appetizers?" "Of course we can," Danny replied, no longer having to check his wallet or calculate costs in his head. "We're celebrating, remember?" As they ordered their food, complete with appetizers, desserts, and all the fixings, Danny watched his children's faces light up with each new possibility. Their lives had changed in so many ways, but the most important change was the sense of security and hope they all felt now. Danny traced his fingers over the photo frame, his heart swelling with pride. Emma's cheeks had regained their rosy glow, a far cry from the pale, tired look she'd worn during her illness. Lucas stood beside her, his gap-toothed grin revealing the missing front teeth he'd lost last month. The memory of their weekend at the park was still fresh. The sound of their laughter as they chased each other around the playground, the peaceful picnic they'd shared under the old oak tree. His office, though modest, felt like a symbol of everything they'd achieved. The walls were no longer closing in on him like they used to in his old jobs. The steady hum of the office outside his door was comforting rather than overwhelming. On his desk, beside the family photo, sat a small potted plant, a gift from his team when he'd received the promotion. They'd written a card expressing their appreciation for his leadership, something he never thought he'd experience. Danny glanced at his calendar, noting the upcoming parent-teacher conference. For the first time, he wouldn't have to rush between jobs or apologize for being late. He could attend without the gnawing worry about missing work or losing pay. The thought brought a smile to his face as he remembered Emma's latest report card, straight A's, despite all the school she'd missed during her treatment. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucas's soccer coach, confirming the weekend game schedule. Danny had never missed a game since Lucas started playing, but now he could truly enjoy watching his son play instead of calculating how many hours of overtime he'd need to make up for being there. The morning mail cart rattled past his office, and Sarah, the mail clerk, poked her head in. "Morning, Mr. Winters. Got your mail here." She placed a small stack on his desk with a friendly smile. "Thanks, Sarah, and please, it's still just Danny," he replied, grateful that his promotion hadn't changed how his coworkers treated him. Among the envelopes was one from the Children's Hospital. Danny opened it, expecting another bill, but instead found a letter confirming that Emma's final treatment had been fully covered by the charity foundation. His eyes misted over as he remembered the day Malcolm had introduced him to the foundation's board members. The weight that had lifted from his shoulders that day had been immeasurable. A knock at his door drew his attention. Malcolm stood there, dressed in his usual understated but immaculate suit. "Got a minute, Danny?" "Of course." Danny gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I was just reading the letter from the hospital. I don't know how to thank you enough for everything." Malcolm waved off the gratitude with a gentle smile. "You did all the hard work, Danny. I just opened a door. You walked through it on your own." Danny shook his head, thinking of all the changes the past months had brought. His apartment was the same, but it felt different now. The furniture was no longer worn and tired-looking. Emma had her own desk for homework, and Lucas's room had proper shelving for his growing collection of books and sports trophies. The refrigerator was always full, and the constant worry about making rent was gone. "The team's numbers are up again this quarter," Malcolm commented, pulling out a report. "Your department's efficiency has improved by 30% since you took over." Danny nodded, pride mixing with humility. "We have good people. They just needed someone to believe in them." He paused, understanding the parallel to his own story. Malcolm's eyes crinkled with knowing warmth. "Just like someone else I know." Through the office window, Danny could see the mall where it all began. The food court was barely visible from this angle, but he could picture himself sitting there all those months ago, eating his children's leftover food and feeling trapped in an endless cycle of struggle. Emma's science fair is next week, Danny said, changing the subject. She's been working on her project every night. Something about sustainable energy. She's way ahead of where I was at her age. Children have a way of surprising us, Malcolm replied. Sometimes they just need the right conditions to bloom. Danny thought about his own childhood, how different things were for his kids now. They didn't have to worry about electricity being cut off or wonder if there would be enough food for dinner. They could focus on being children, on learning and growing and dreaming. The intercom buzzed, reminding Danny of his upcoming team meeting. As he gathered his materials, he caught his reflection in the window. He looked younger somehow. The permanent worry lines on his forehead had softened. His clothes were new and well-fitted, his posture straighter, his eyes clearer. You know, Malcolm said, standing to leave, I still remember that day in the food court. You looked lost, but there was something in your eyes, a determination that told me you just needed a chance. Danny smiled, remembering his confusion at seeing the supposed janitor in a business suit the next day. I thought I was losing my mind when I saw you in that suit. Sometimes the best way to understand someone's struggles is to walk in their shoes, Malcolm replied. Or in my case, push a broom alongside them. Looking at his calendar again, Danny saw the reminder for Emma's upcoming dance recital and Lucas's science project due date. Simple things that once would have seemed like insurmountable challenges now filled him with joy. He could be there for these moments, fully present, without the shadow of financial worry hanging over him. A photo of last month's company picnic caught his eye. Emma and Lucas playing with his coworkers' children, while he and Malcolm stood chatting with the team. It was a casual snapshot, but it captured something profound. The sense of belonging, of community, of finally being part of something bigger than just survival. Danny straightened his tie, a simple gesture that still felt new and meaningful. His reflection showed more than just a man in a suit. It showed a father who had kept his promises, who had persevered through the darkest times, and who had learned that accepting help didn't mean surrendering dignity. Malcolm paused at the door. The quarterly review board meets next week. I'd like you to present your department's results. Danny nodded, feeling ready for the challenge. The numbers were good, but more importantly, he understood now that his value wasn't just in the figures he could present. It was in the lives he touched, the team he led, and the example he set for his children. Through his office window, he could see the city stretching out before him. Somewhere out there, Emma and Lucas were in their classrooms, learning and growing, unburdened by the worries that had once seemed insurmountable. Their future stretched out bright and full of possibility, just like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. Danny walked through the bustling food court, holding Lucas's small hand while Emma skipped ahead, her ponytail bouncing with each step. The familiar scents of fast food and coffee filled the air, but everything felt different now. His worn work boots had been replaced with comfortable sneakers, and his once threadbare jacket was now a neat navy windbreaker. Dad, can we get ice cream? Lucas tugged at his sleeve, eyes bright with hope. Danny smiled, remembering the days when such a simple request would have sent anxiety coursing through his veins. Sure, buddy. Emma, want to join us? Emma turned back, her healthy glow a stark contrast to the pale, sick child she'd been just months ago. Can I get the strawberry sundae? Of course, sweetheart. Danny's chest tightened with gratitude. The same food court where he'd once scraped by on his children's leftovers now felt like a place of celebration. They approached the ice cream counter, and Danny couldn't help but notice how different it felt to order without counting every penny. The teenage server smiled as she scooped generous portions of ice cream into waffle cones and bowls. Remember when we used to share one cone? Lucas asked, licking his chocolate ice cream. Danny ruffled his son's hair. Those were different times, buddy. But you know what? We made it through together. They settled at a table near the center of the food court. Danny watched his children enjoy their treats, their faces lit with simple joy. The weight that had once pressed down on his shoulders felt lighter now. His new job provided more than just financial stability. It had given him the chance to be present for moments like these. Emma looked up from her sundae, a dot of whipped cream on her nose. Dad, remember when you used to work 2 jobs? We hardly saw you then. Danny nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I remember, sweetheart, but things are different now. We have more time together, don't we? And I'm not sick anymore, Emma added matter-of-factly, spooning another bite of ice cream. Danny's eyes misted over as he remembered those terrifying days when Emma's medical bills had seemed like an insurmountable mountain. Now, thanks to Malcolm's help and the medical coverage from his new job, Those worries were behind them. The familiar sound of a sweeping broom caught Danny's attention. His eyes drifted to the corner where he'd first met Malcolm. A different janitor worked there now, methodically cleaning the floors just as Malcolm had done. Danny smiled, remembering how that chance encounter had changed everything. Lucas finished his ice cream and pointed to the arcade. "Dad, can we play some games, please?" "Sure thing, champ." Danny reached for his wallet, not the old cracked one he'd had before, but a simple leather one Malcolm had given him as a gift when he'd received his promotion. "Here's some tokens for both of you. Stay where I can see you, okay?" As his children raced off to the arcade, Danny leaned back in his chair, taking in the scene around him. Families chatted and laughed, sharing meals and making memories. He was one of them now, not an outsider looking in, but a father who could provide for his children without the constant fear of falling short. He pulled out his phone and checked his calendar. Tomorrow, he had a meeting with Malcolm to discuss expanding their community outreach program. Danny had gone from being a recipient of help to someone who could offer it to others. The thought filled him with purpose. Emma's laughter echoed from the arcade, and Danny turned to watch his children play. Lucas was teaching his sister how to play a racing game, their heads close together as they shared the controls. The sight reminded him of how far they'd come as a family. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. A young mother struggled past their table, trying to manage a tray while holding her toddler. Without hesitation, Danny stood up to help her, steadying the tray before it could tip. The woman thanked him with grateful eyes, and Danny remembered how it felt to be overwhelmed and alone. "You're welcome," he said warmly. "We all need a helping hand sometimes." Returning to his seat, Danny checked his watch. It was almost time to head home, where a comfortable apartment and fully stocked fridge awaited them simple luxuries that once seemed impossibly out of reach. "Kids," he called out, 5 more minutes, then we need to get going." As Emma and Lucas finished their games, Danny gathered their things. The food court had thinned out, the dinner rush giving way to the quiet of early evening. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, and waited for his children to join him. "Did you have fun?" he asked as they walked toward the exit. "The best!" Lucas exclaimed, clutching a small stuffed animal he'd won. "Thanks, Dad," Emma added, slipping her hand into his. "For everything." Danny squeezed her hand, understanding that her gratitude went beyond just ice cream and arcade games. They passed the janitor's closet, the same one where Malcolm had once stored his cleaning supplies, while secretly being one of the city's most generous philanthropists. At the mall entrance, Danny paused and looked back at the janitor's closet. The metal door was closed, but he could almost see Malcolm there, leaning on his broom with that knowing smile. The memory made him smile too. That chance encounter had taught him that hope could appear in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness came disguised in the simplest packages. With his children by his side, Danny turned toward the exit. The setting sun cast long shadows through the glass doors, but they didn't feel ominous anymore. Instead, they seemed to point the way forward, toward a future bright with possibility. His family, his greatest gift, walked beside him, their footsteps echoing in perfect harmony. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Danny Winters, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.